Welcome to episode 3 of ERBS University. Last lecture, we talked about how damage is calculated, and we went over all the stats in the game. This was so that we could be better prepared for today's lecture. Today, we'll be learning about how to make good builds. I hope you guys brought something to write with, because class is in session. So let's address the elephant in the room. Why would I make my own build, when I can just use the top-rated save plan? Well, the answer is so that you can feel special. There's an inexplicable pride that comes with making your own build. Also, it allows you to cater a build to your desired playstyle. Another big reason is to understand the build making process. If you can get a good idea of what the creator was thinking when they made a build, then it'll help you be more efficient when you run it. It can also help you decide what item upgrades that you want, because normally those aren't included in a save plan. Last but not least, ERBS is a game that gets small updates every week and fairly big updates every season. So the build that worked today might get nerfed tomorrow. Then someone will have to find the new optimal build. That's the beauty of MOBAs. These changes reward players who have a core understanding of the game and have the ability to adapt to new changes. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that you can only benefit from knowing how to make your own build. Now that I'm done with my pseudo-motivational speech, let's talk about what makes a build good. Generally, a good build should abide by some of the following principles. Number 1. A good build should be complete within 4 to 5 zones. Number 2. You should obtain a bulk of your items within your first 2 to 3 zones. Number 3. The pathing should be efficient and logical. Number 4. Try and get highly contested items in your first 2 to 3 zones. Number 5. Your build shouldn't require 4 to 5 of one item if possible. If there's no way to avoid it, then you should be able to get those items in more than one zone. This problem is normally seen with skill amp builds because they often require 4 to 5 pickaxes and 4 to 5 gemstones. Number 6. On average, your build should be finished at around the start of night 1. Number 7. If possible, your build should complete your weapon, have some move speed and some defense in your first 2 to 3 zones. Number 8. You should be able to get the components for potential item upgrades if your inventory space allows it. Number 9. Your build should consider the state of the game when you get to your zones. For example, it may not be a good idea to have Hotel as your 4th zone, because at around that time, people will be contesting Tree of Life, and if you can't hold your own, you're probably going to get killed. By far, one of the most important things you can do when making a build is to test it out. Trial and error is really important here. If you're making a build and something doesn't feel good, then you should probably change it. Making a good build is a continual process. The more you test and run the build, the better it gets. This is because after time, you'll be able to identify what your build is lacking and what needs to be tweaked. Now, we're going to go do 3 things. First, we're going to go over a build that follows all these principles and can be considered as a good build. Then we're going to actually make our own build from scratch and try and make it follow some of these principles. And lastly, we're going to go over some of the augments because I feel like augments can be considered as part of the build. So let's go over a build that can be considered good. Here's just a little backstory about this build. This is the build that I run on Adriana whenever I play ranked. I've been running this build for quite a while now and there's no issues with it. It's good, it's consistent, and it has everything I need. So let's actually identify why it's good. First of all, let's look at the items. The items provide me with all the stats that I would want on Adriana. So Adriana is a character that best scales with attack power, a little bit of defenses, and cooldown reduction. So let's look at the stat that each item provides. Our weapon provides us attack power and cooldown reduction, which is stats that I both want. It also provides me attack speed, which is good. Our chest provides us with a lot of health, defense, and cooldown reduction, again, which is all stats that I want. And if you guys were paying attention to my damage video, it also provides damage from basic attacks, which is good because that's something that defense won't protect against. Attack ops, here again, you can see defense, max HP, cooldown reduction. I do want to talk about the attack speed. The attack speed is nice, mainly just for farming, and it's also good for those moments in fights on Adriana where you're low on cooldowns. But this isn't an Adriana guide, just know that it's a good stat. Sita Shah Jahan, I think it's the arm that gives you the second most attack power, which again, Adriana really wants, she scales with it. Also, max HP and defense from basic attacks. Straight Jacket sneakers are mainly for the movement speed, but the extra skill damage really helps out because her passive works with extra skill damage. Her Q, however, does not. But again, this is not an Adriana guide, so I'll leave it. There's also a bit of SP regen, which is nice. White Crane Fan is really good for the movement speed. The extra skill damage also synergizes well with Adriana's kit. But the biggest thing about this item is the healing reduction, because healing in this game is fairly strong, so If you can get healing reduction, it's never a wasted item passive. So now that we can see that the items make sense and they synergize well with our build, let's actually check to see if it meets some of the principles that we discussed about earlier. So first of all, our build is finished within 5 zones, which is good. That's one check. Second, we obtain most of our items in our first zone. As you can see, we can get 8 of our items in Avenue. In Archery Range, we can get 4. In School, we can get 5. We can see here that at most, we only ever require 2 duplicate items, and those are the batteries and the hammers. Here we can also see that we get our weapon and our shoes in the first 2 to 3 zones, which is, again, really good. The save plan doesn't give me too much defense in the first 2 to 3 zones, but again, just the fact that I have a weapon and some move speed is enough survivability for me. You can't see it in the save plan, but when I go through zones 2, 3, and 4, I'm able to craft a patch robe, a pair of Heelys, and a chain coif. All 3 of those are components for potential RNG items that I want, those being the Queen of Hearts armor, Boots of Hermes, and Mithril Helm. Also, with the experience of running this build a lot, I know that I can consistently get this build done at around night 1. And here you can see the pathing is also efficient and logical. I start in Avenue, I take the teleporter to Archery Range, walk down to School, and what I do, I walk up to Alley. When I'm in Alley, I can potentially get hammers, lighters, bandages, scissors. So there's a lot of items that I can get in Alley while I'm walking up to the teleporter. Obviously, I won't spend too much time. And then I can teleport down to Beach. And from Beach, once I get my items, I walk down to Uptown Teleporter, and then I'm in Hospital. So for the most part, the pathing is efficient and logical. A quick explanation for why I go to Uptown Teleporter instead of Hotel Teleporter. That's because normally at around Zone 4, Hotel has Tree of Life spawning, and everyone in the lobby will be there trying to get it. So it's just safer for me to go to Uptown, because at this point, I will still be missing 3 core components that I need, so I'll be fairly weak. But once I go to Hospital, I should get full build, and then there's no more issues. I do also want to place a bit more emphasis on Alley, because normally when I run this build, I get my hammers from Alley while I'm walking through. It's because the loot boxes from Alley to School are fairly uncontested, so I'm consistently able to at least find 1 or 2 hammers there. I'm pointing this out because it's really nice to have a zone where you path through and you can get more contested items, because normally getting hammers in Beach may be a bit of a stretch, especially during Zone 4. And normally when you create a build, there should be certain foods that you'll be able to craft, and you don't really have to worry about it too much. As long as you identify and know what they are, then you'll be fine. If I go Avenue Archery Range, I can craft Choco Pies. If not, I can walk up to Alley and get lighters, and then if I wanted to, I can make baked potatoes or use those lighters for food in the future. When I'm in School, I can get bread, and if I kill chickens, I can get meat to make hamburgers, which is definitely one of my favorite foods to craft, just because they're so easy to craft. And another thing to note here, if there's a lot of people spawning in Hospital, then I have the option of going Forest or Hotel to get my items. So overall, this build is fairly consistent and has a lot of options, so if something doesn't go my way, I'll be able to make up for it later. So now that we know what a good build looks like, let's go over some of the techniques that we can use when we actually make our own build. First of all, make sure you hide all duplicate items and also harvest and hunting materials. You can find harvest and hunting materials in almost every zone, at least for the non-RNG items like leather and branches, so you really don't have to worry about them. It's good to turn off this option just so that the save plan looks less convoluted and there's less items overall, making it a lot easier to understand. Generally, it's good to start by picking the items you want first, then find a path that works in 5 zones. If you can't make it work in 5 zones, then swap out one of the items for something that will make it work. I know it's easy to be greedy in terms of what items you want, but it's definitely better to finish a decent build quickly than an amazing build that'll take too long to finish. Make sure you pick the zones that'll net you the most items first, especially for zones 1 to 3. Hover over each zone and count the number of items. Do, however, try and get items that are generally more contested first. This varies from build to build, but normally some contested items can be seen as hammers, lighters, feathers, papers, and gemstones. Try and get your weapon / movement speed and defense in your first 2 to 3 zones if possible. This one isn't mandatory, but it's nice to have because you always want a little bit of survivability. If you have to pick between 2 zones, make sure you compare a wide variety of things. Look at the possible duplicate items and the item upgrade components that they provide. Also look at the pathing and the nearby zones. And then finally, consider which zone will be more dangerous when you get there. Last but not least, once you've completed your build, make sure you test it out for several games and make changes to it if you notice any glaring issues. Do try and focus on what you can do outside of the build to make it more efficient. This would be stuff like pathing and inventory management. Just a quick disclaimer, at the time of recording this video, there's people doing construction in my house, so if you hear any loud noises in the background, I assure you it's not someone trying to get out of my basement. I make sure that they're secure and I soundproof it, so there's no worries there. Now, let's make a build from scratch. The first thing I do is to come up with a concept for my build. I'm making a build for Celine, and so far what I found is that I run out of SP a lot. So to counteract that, I'm going to want a lot of max SP and SP regen items. I also know that some of her abilities scale with skill amp, so I'll make sure to get some skill amp items. Lastly, I know that Celine doesn't really have any reliable mobility, so I'm going to want some extra movement speed in my build. Since max SP and SP regen are my main priorities, I'm going to make sure that I search items by category and I go under maximum SP, and then if I can't find any items for the specific gear slot, then I'll look for SP regeneration. This is a really good function of the save plan maker that ERBS has provided. It's really good, allows you to search items by category, you can search all items, or you can even search it by area, which again, it's really good. Alright, so now that we know what stats we want, I'm going to go through and pick what items that I plan on building. For my weapon, my options are either the marble or the incendiary bomb. Both of these weapons give me skill amp, but in this case the marble has a little bit more skill amp and also a little bit more attack power. On the other end of things, incendiary bomb has some CDR and a little bit of attack speed, which will be nice for Celine's empowered auto attack. But here, the biggest deciding factor in my choice is definitely the fact that the marble has healing reduction built in. In its current state, I'm of the opinion that healing in this game is fairly strong. If someone's running lifesteal or omni siphon, they can heal for quite ridiculous amounts. But on the topic of heal cut, I could also get it on another item. I could get it on the white crane fan or maybe the rocker's jacket. And if I do end up feeling like the incendiary bomb is better, then I'll definitely pick up the white crane fan to just get the heal cut. But that'll require some testing. As for my chest, there's no items that give me max SP, so I'm opting for one that has SP regen. Here I have 3 reliable options. There's the Dragon Dobok, the High Priest Robes, and the Chang Pao. Chang Pao has flat 2 base SP regen, High Priest Robes has 85% SP regen, and Dragon Dobok has 100% SP regen. From what I know about Celine, I think in terms of her base stats, she has pretty standard SP regen, so I think percent SP regen will probably be a bit better here. But for the most part, I don't think it'll matter too much. This is a scenario where I could go to the practice tool and test out the different items to see which one nets me the highest SP regen. It's the easiest way to do it if you don't want to bust out your calculator and crunch the numbers. Also, I'm not going to go the blazing dress because this would require me to get the Tree of Life in hotel, and it's not always guaranteed that I'll get it, so I really don't want to rely upon something so shaky. And after comparing the stats of these 3 items, I think I've elected to pick High Priest Robes just because it gives me a little bit more defense than my other options and also has the CDR. And I don't think I really want some of the stats from the other items, but again, this is something that I could test out in the practice tool. But for now, it's the High Priest Robes. For my head, I chose the Imperial Burgonet because it gives me skill amp, max SP, and most importantly, it gives me some additional movement speed, which is important since Celine is fairly immobile. The Helm of Banneret would definitely be a more tankier option, but I'd lose out on a potential 200 max SP, which I feel like that's pretty important. But as I said before, if I test out the build and I feel really squishy, then it might be worth it to pick Helm of Banneret over the Imperial Burgonet. As for my arm, I have the option of either picking the Tindalo Span or the Drop Near, but I'm going to choose the Tindalo Span mainly because it gives me 12% cooldown reduction, and as you guys can see, I'm at 25% right now, and the High Priest Robes increases my cooldown reduction cap by plus 5%, so if I pick the Tindalo Span, I would be at clean 35%, which just means I'm making full use of the High Priest Robes, and I'll have some synergy between these 2 items, which is good. But the trade-off is that I'd be losing 5% skill application from the Drop Near, but again, that's a sacrifice I'm willing to pay for an extra 10% CDR. As for my legs, I'm going the straight jacket sneakers just because they make the most sense. I don't really want the QC Fearless because I feel like I don't need the crit chance. If I wanted a tankier build, I could definitely see myself going EOD suit and Helm of Banneret. But I'm going to choose to go straight jacket sneakers because they will offer me more damage. They have the 10 extra skill damage. And another big thing is that straight jacket sneakers are a lot easier to build than EOD boots because EOD boots being legendary, they have a lot of components. If we just hover over the item stats, we can see that EOD boots has a lot of components that goes into it, whereas the straight jacket sneakers doesn't have that many. I do want to point out that definitely in terms of upgrade item, glacial shoes would just be like direct upgrade here. So that's something I should keep in mind. And for my accessory, I'm definitely going to be going to Uchiwa as it's the only accessory that I can reliably get that has SP regen. As you can see, Glacial Ice requires the Tree of Life and Lunar Embrace requires Meteorite, and I'd rather not be restricted behind those items. If I did want to replace this item, then I could definitely look to these 2 options as potential item upgrades. So now all my items are selected, and looking at my stats, I'll have 54% skill amp and 205% increased SP regen, along with a whopping 640 max SP, and also 35% CDR, which wasn't too mandatory. I'd be okay without it, but it's definitely a plus side and it's worth noting. However, I do have only 40 defense, which is fairly small in terms of what you can accumulate in this game. And I have 0 max HP, so this definitely means that I'm essentially going a glass cannon build, and I should make a mental note of that when I'm actually testing the build. I will be squishy and I will blow up. But on the plus side, I should deal a lot of damage. So now that the items are selected, let's go through and make a route. So before I even do anything, I'm going to go to filters, and I'm going to click hide duplicates, hide harvest, and hunting materials. This just makes this page a lot less cluttered when you're comparing between zones. If I'm trying to pick between 2 zones, then it's entirely possible that I'll turn on the hide duplicates options just to see which zone would give me more items if I missed them earlier on. So after counting the items that I get in each zone, pawn would give me 10 items here, so I definitely want to be picking this first, especially because I need 3 pickaxes and I also need 3 gemstones. So I think it's crucial that I got those early on so I don't have to worry about them later in the game. So here I can see myself in a pretty good scenario. I have 3 zones nearby that all have teleporters, so I'm definitely going to want to go to one of those next. And luckily here, Avenue gives me 7 items that I need, whereas Hospital and Temple only give me around 4 to 5 items, so I definitely want to go Avenue here. So for my 3rd zone, Ali's nearby and it gives me 6 items, but the important thing here is that Ali gives me 2 lighters, which I definitely may struggle finding later on in the game. And it's definitely reasonable to expect to get 2 lighters from Ali since it's only my 3rd zone. And the biggest thing here is that if you can look at the pathing, it's very efficient, very logical. If I want to get from zone 1 to zone 3, I essentially just need to walk into a straight line and I'll be there. I don't need to take any teleporter, so this will definitely save me time. And as we can see here, I only need to get 4 items from my 4th and 5th zones in order to be full build. Which is definitely nice because at this point, items will definitely be more scarce, since people would have already gone through most of these zones and looted for their builds. So after looking through the zones, I can see that if I go to archery range and temple, it gives me 2 items that I need, the monk's robe and the paper. And if I go hospital and cemetery, they both give me ice and feathers. So now I need to compare which zone is better, then make a choice. We'll start with archery range versus temple. In terms of pathing, if I wanted to go from alley to archery range, I'd only be able to get there by walking to the entrance between alley and archery range. Whereas if I wanted to go to temple, I could walk down to the bottom of alley, then enter temple, or I could walk to the top of alley, then take the teleporter. So in this case, I think I'm going to pick temple just because it makes more sense. I'll be able to get there through both of the exits for alley, whereas if I'm going archery range, I need to go to a specific one. And for temple, we can also see that it has a teleporter in the zone, so if I wanted to get to my next zone after that, then I'll be able to take that. Whereas archery range has no teleporter, and I'd have to either walk back to alley or walk down to hotel, which would waste time. As for hospital versus cemetery, I think I'm definitely going to pick hospital, because if I'm at the bottom of temple, then I can walk through pond and enter hospital, or if I'm at the top of temple, then I can teleport to hospital. So it's essentially the same reasons why I chose temple over archery range. But overall, my 4th and 5th zones are definitely interchangeable, and I can go to one zone over the other depending on the state of the game. For example, if there's 6 people spawning in temple, then I'm definitely going to go to archery range instead, because there's a higher chance for me to find my items at that point. So in terms of deciding between hospital or temple, I'm definitely going to look at which items that I'll be able to get when I go there. If I go temple first, then I'll be able to get my straitjacket sneakers. And if I go hospital, then I'll be able to get my Imperial Burgonet. Because I want to place priority on getting early movement speed because I think it improves survivability, especially on Celine, who's somewhat of an immobile character. I think it's definitely better to go temple 4th than hospital 5th. So once you're at this point of your build, you've picked your items and you've also picked your routing, make sure that you actually try out your build. Remember, trial and error is key. For me, this is the 3rd iteration of this build. Before I had opted for this build, which definitely has more defense, skill lamp, and CDR, but after testing it out, I found out that I was running out of SP way too quickly. Because of this, I went through and changed the build so that it prioritized more SP and SP regen. And for this iteration, as you can see here, I chose to get Incendiary Bomb and Drop Near. I also chose to go to archery range as my 4th zone and then hotel as my 5th zone. And as you can see, this would be a 6 zone build since I'm still missing a feather. And also I got my shoes and my weapon in my 4th and 5th zones, which is definitely not optimal. So as you guys can see, it took me a couple failed attempts to come up with a build that I'm somewhat proud of. Even then, I'm sure there's still something that I could change that would make this build better. I'm telling you this because it's very important to understand that no one makes a perfect build in their first try. Just keep working on your build and you'll eventually figure something out. Now for the finishing touches. Augments. Obviously augments are really dependent on the character, but I still consider them as part of your build, just because you can find a lot of synergies between augments and items. Here are some of the synergies that I found. If you're going for a full tank / defense build, then you could run reinforced armor to get even tankier, since it makes damage reduction stats 130% effective on your character. Essentially, the more defense reduction stats you have, the more effective this augment becomes. If you're going for a more glass cannon build, then Dismantle Goliath would be a reasonable option, since most of the characters will have more HP than you since you have no bonus HP from your items. So there's a high chance that you'd make good use of this augment. If you need SP regen in your build, then Spirit Culling is a solid option since you can recover SP based on your damage. This augment won't solve all of your SP problems, but it'll definitely help. Urban Warfare is definitely a must if you're going for a more trap based character or someone who generally builds a lot of traps. This augment is fairly situational, so you probably won't see people running it a lot. But by far the coolest thing I've seen is the synergy between Nightingale and Logistics. As we can see here, in order to build a Nightingale, we need a squad leader armband and we need some healing potions. And from the description of Logistics, we know that every night it'll give us a couple healing potions. So if you have Nightingale in your build, then definitely consider running Logistics, just because you can completely cut out half of the items that you need in order to build Nightingale. As for some of the other augments, they really depend more on your character and your playstyle instead of your build, so I'll be going over them in more detail in a future lecture. Congrats, we have reached the end of the build section. The next section is on how we can improve our gameplay. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please do let me know in the comments. Class dismissed.